Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, here at the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio, I interview the top experts in the world in the field of natural healing. And I like to listen to all kinds of people. However, there are some people whose work is so important to individuals and our whole society at large that I have them back. So today we have Kevin Parker for the third time, which really says a lot about how much I respect Kevin Parker and everything that he is doing. Now, who is the amazing Kevin Parker? Kevin Parker is the author of an incredible book, Winning Against All Odds. And I read that book, I could hardly put it down. He is a recovery coach, an addiction specialist, an interventionist, and a program director for a rehab facility. And you can find out more about Kevin Parker and his life-saving work at his website, truewarriorsuccess.com. Welcome, Kevin Parker.
Oh, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I really appreciate that. I'm humbled by the appreciation and respect you have for what I do and how I help people. And I really, really appreciate that. So thank you so much.
Yes. And, we all do whatever we do. Like maybe lots of people couldn't be a medical intuitive.
No.
Lots of people think, well, I'm intuitive, but it's like, and lots of people maybe want to help people overcome addictions. But then there's this whole other level of skill that's required. So today we're talking about what is an interventionist. So Kevin Parker, recovery coach and interventionist, what exactly is an interventionist?
So, very plainly spoken, an interventionist is a mediator that gets involved in a particular group of people, usually a family, and helps come to a logical conclusion to fix a problem. Typically, if it's a drug intervention, we're trying to get them into a rehab facility, into a detox, into some kind of program to get rid of the problem. If there's some other problem, we are trying to become the solution makers. So basically, we're problem solvers.
Okay, I think that's a pretty succinct explanation. Now, what's interesting is in my work as a medical intuitive healer and in my 30 years full-time experience in natural healing, one of the many things that I've studied is family dynamics. And when you have a family, a lot of times different people in the family will play different roles. So you have the addict, you have the enabler. I'm just naming some common roles. You have a lost child, you have the scapegoat.
The hero.
The hero, exactly.
Yes.
Right? And even the hero, which sounds like, oh, I want to be the hero. Well, that can be a problem as well. So having the finesse to identify different roles that people are playing in a family and have everybody work together for a common goal of saving someone's life from addiction, that is serious talent.
Well, let me tell you, it is not easy. It really is not easy, but I absolutely love what I do. And you're absolutely right. The dynamic of the family is absolutely imperative to discover who's playing which role, even simply down to the way that you orchestrate where they sit in the room during intervention, because they all have relationships that you're not aware of. And one simple behavioral mechanism or some kind of communication between two people might throw off the whole intervention. So the way that you sit people in the room is important. And and they all have specific roles, and they all are able to be utilized and leveraged for the greater good of what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And in my work as a medical intuitive healer, part of what I will sometimes do is I identify the role that someone's playing. For example, let's say you're the scapegoat. Well, if you're the scapegoat, you're literally holding the negative energy for the family, right? And then you carry that role forward with you wherever you go, in your job, with your families, right? And you can spend 20 years in therapy talking about how miserable you feel being the scapegoat, and it's another thing to do deep healing work to like release that role. Now, Kevin Parker, as an interventionist, can you explain for our audience, why do families actually need an interventionist? Why can't we just all figure this out on our own? We know addiction's bad.
That's a great question. And I always tell people, don't try to do an intervention on your own, because it'll always fail. And I have a personal experience of that. The reason for an interventionist is because whoever you're doing the intervention on already knows the people that are in the intervention, say if they're their family, and they have specific relationships and specific knowledge, and they know how to manipulate and control the situation. And they also don't know these people that are doing the intervention as professionals or experts on the field. So they're not respected as authoritative figure. They're seen as mom or dad or brother or sister. And that doesn't hold any weight when you're trying to convince them that you're trying to do the right thing in their life in a subject they know nothing about. But if you get an authoritative figure that's a third party, that they're unknown about, that they have no leverage over, no emotional, physical, or mental leverage over, they listen to it. And the family has to be compliant with the interventionist to give them absolute control, to show the person that's being intervened on that they're in control of the room, and that demands the respect and the attention of the person that's being intervened on. So it's very, very important to have an interventionist, because they're seen as authoritative figure, an expert on the field, and they hold so much more weight. They're not able to be manipulated, and they direct in a more assertive way that's respected during this intervention.
So, Kevin Parker, I know that you have a personal experience because you went through addiction yourself, and your family got together. So what was good was they got together. They decided, we don't want Kevin to be an addict anymore. But then the outcome was horrible for everybody. Do you mind sharing that story? It's in your book, Winning Against All Odds.
Absolutely. I'd be more than happy to. So my family tried to perform a unprofessional intervention by waking me up 7 o'clock in the morning, all of them waiting in the living room, and basically attacking me and telling me that you need to go to a rehab for 2 years, or you got to get out of the house. You're all messed up. You're drugged up. You're lost. You're going to die eventually. And they kept accusing me of stuff and pointing fingers and putting all this weight on my shoulders. And I got really, really defensive. And I said, you know what? I don't need your help. I'm leaving. And I walked out. I stormed out of the house. I grabbed my safe. I threw it on my shoulders. And I walked to my best friend's house. And you know what? That night, I overdosed. I ended up in a coma for 3 weeks. I died 3 times in the hospital. It got so bad, they even had a priest come in and read me my last rites. Nothing short of a miracle. I just woke up. And what I woke up to was being hooked up to 10 different machines. So my mother crying her eyes out. My father looked like he aged 10 years. The doctor saying that if I survived, I'd be a complete vegetable and lose all 4 of my limbs. I had multi-organ failure. My liver, kidneys, lungs, heart, brain completely shut down. I had 108 fever. They had me under ice blankets. My brain was frying. There was no reason but a miracle from a higher power, from God, whatever you want to believe in, that saved my life for a reason and gave me a second opportunity. Now, unfortunately, I lost my left leg during this situation, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it gives me a constant reminder every morning of where I could end up if I make the wrong decision, and what my purpose in life is to help other people that are struggling with the same demons and addictions that I was. And I'm just forever grateful that I had a second chance, because I shouldn't be here today. And I'm so grateful that I get to actually have a purpose in life that impacts so many people across the country, across the world. And I'm just truly blessed to even be able to do anything. I always say, if I could save one life, one family, everything I ever went through was all worth it. And I've done that multiple two times over. And I'm just so blessed to be living a life that I truly love to live.
That is such a profound story. And I'm so happy that you can bring forth your sole purpose. So your personal story is a terrible example of like the worst case scenario. Although I guess if it was really the worst case scenario, you would have passed away, right? But you know, so many people think, well, we're smart, or we've been in therapy, we can do this. What can possibly happen when families try to do an intervention without a professional?
Well, very simply, that they won't be respected or recognized as experts in this field. And the addict will immediately start manipulating each and every person in the family, because they know your strengths and weaknesses, and that they've known you for their whole lives. They know how to talk to you. They know how to get a little bit of leverage and positioning where they could dig their heels in the ground and say, no, I can't go because this, or I'm not an addict, or I don't have that bad of a problem. I can handle it. I'm gonna lose my job. You know, if you don't help me, I'm gonna be sick and I'm gonna die. Like they'll pull on all the emotional strings of your heart until they get their way. The whole thing of addiction is addiction is a poor solution to a problem that becomes an even bigger problem. And the addict does everything in their power to create an environment that is conducive for their addiction and for them to use comfortably every single day. And people make decisions from the avoidance of pain and the obtainment of pleasure. And as long as it's more pleasurable to use than to get clean, they're going to continue to use. There needs to be barriers, there needs to be consequences, and there needs to be hard lines that need to be enforced for them to make a difference. But ultimately, the addict has a choice. You can't force anybody, unless you're in Florida or Tennessee, to go to treatment. So as a professional interventionist, we learn ways how to leverage the things that they like, love, and appreciate and value as pawns, as, say, carrot and stick, to get them to ultimately make the decision to get the help that they need.
Okay, beautiful explanation. And with that, let's take a break and listen to a message from one of our commercial sponsors here at UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, and we're learning today about what is an interventionist. Kevin Parker, recovery coach, interventionist. Will you explain for our audience what exactly is an intervention? So let's say I have a family member who needs help. They've got an addiction problem. Can you take us through a process? Because it doesn't just start when we're all in the room confronting the person. So what is an intervention? What's the process?
Well, an intervention is a comprehensive process that people don't quite understand how much goes into it. Typically, an intervention lasts up to 2 weeks of preparation before you even get into the room. So initially, you make the agreement to have the intervention. The interventionist would meet up with the family if they're doing it right. There's a million people that do it different ways, but you would meet up with the family. You get all the information you possibly can about each and every single individual. You get all the information that you need about the addict. You would get access to their social medias, to any kind of privy information that will help you create rapport or know how to manipulate the situation in the best possible way, so the addict trusts you and believes in you, and you could build that connection with. So basically, you're studying the family dynamic, the hero, the scapegoat, the enabler. You have to figure out who the enabler is in the room, because there's always an enabler in every single addiction. I always say behind every addict, there's an enabler that's even sicker. And that's one of the most important things of the intervention, is to discover who the enabler is and position them in a place in the room and in the process that they can't sabotage the situation, because they can undo it in 2 seconds. One look, one word, one statement, the whole intervention is blown up. And I'm a very good interventionist. I would say the only time that my interventions don't work is when the enabler ruins it. And it blows up, and there's nothing you can do about it, because they're sicker than the addict. And excuse me, when you discover who the enabler is, you have to work with them extensively before the actual intervention. A few coaching sessions, really tell them exactly what they do, or they might not even be allowed to come to the intervention if they're not willing to participate, because you need 100% compliance. We need to be all on the same team, and all the responsibility and authority needs to be put in the lap of the interventionist. So it's the interventionist against the addict, and we're negotiating what's going to happen next. And you take the responsibility of the family out. So there's no guilt trips. There's no, oh, but this is going to happen. Oh, you're going to leave me out in the cold, blah, blah, blah. There's none of that. I tell the addict, basically, I'm in charge, and you can either do what we're saying, and we'll give you everything that you want, all the support, all the love, all the resources, everything that you need. Or there's this other option that's going to have major, major consequences, and you're really not going to like it, and it's going to be so unpleasant that eventually you're going to wind up saying, man, the other decision was way better, but it's ultimately your decision. And the way that the interventionist sets up the room, how the people sit, I'm not going to give you my magic sauce on how I do that, but because you might try to do it yourself and you're just not going to be successful. But it's very, very important that every single detail of the intervention is planned out strategically, specifically for the specific addict, for their specific addiction, and for the specific dynamic of the family. Every one of them customizable, and you have to be able to command complete control of the room. And a lot of times there'll be points I'll tap somebody on the shoulder, and I'll be like, please leave the room. And I tell them before we even do the intervention, I'm like, if we get to a point where you're being ineffective, or you're being a disadvantage of any way to this, the end goal of this intervention, I'm going to ask you to leave, and you better leave the room. And I make them all agree to that before I even do the intervention. And many times I kick somebody out of the room. In fact, sometimes it's used as a power move in front of the addict to show that I'm in control. Because if I kick dad out of the room and dad gets up and leaves, he's like, oh no, this guy means business. He's seriously in charge. And it might be just the move that I needed to get him to comply to what I'm saying.
So I have a question for you about addicts. As someone who's a recovery coach and an addiction specialist, and I just want your insight about this. One of the things that we know about narcissists is that narcissists are very sensitive to control. So with that, a narcissist is a specific kind of personality disorder, okay? So my question for you, are most addicts narcissists, or is the addiction itself just something that creates a scenario where it's all about me all the time?
That you hit it right on the head. You're exactly right. No, not every addict is a narcissist, but addiction has narcissistic traits about it that one may deem them a narcissist because they're so selfish and self-centered around their addiction. But it's not necessarily them that's the narcissist. They may have serious self-esteem issues, and they may be serious lovers. They may put everybody first before them in their hearts. They may do drugs because of wanting to take care of somebody else or dealing with somebody else in the family. You never know what the situation is. Trauma is the gateway drug. So it might be some kind of trauma that created this addiction, but the addiction has narcissistic traits to it because it makes them become selfish when it comes to their addiction, because their addiction becomes number one priority above everything in their life. So it can be seen as narcissistic, but not all addicts are narcissists.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Now, in a previous wonderful interview for the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio, I'll never forget when you said, and you repeated it here earlier, that behind every addict is an even sicker enabler. How can family members, and it's always hard, it's so easy to like look at other people and point the finger, it's like they're the problem, but not me. How can family members tell if they are part of the problem? And how does a successful interventionist deal with the enablers?
A great question. The way that you would know that you're an enabler is if you make it easy in any way to let them use drugs, whether that's give them money, let them live in your house, give them privileges. When they get in trouble, bail them out, always be the safety net for them. If they get sick, get them drugs, help them out, baby them. When you reward bad behavior, it's positive. Anytime you're positively reinforcing the bad behavior of addiction and drug use, you're an enabler. I'm a behavioral psychologist, and the number one thing about behavioral psychology and shaping behaviors is if you want to reinforce a habit, you positively reinforce it with a reward. So if you're ever rewarding them for a habit, you're an enabler. And the way that you combat that is through negative punishment, which is the exact opposite of positive reinforcement. It is taking away the things that they value is the way to punish people or make it more difficult for them to use. So if they have a car, if they have a phone, or if you're giving them money, or if you're making it really easy for them to use or supporting them in any way, it might be even just emotional support and being there for them, even though they're using, because no matter what, you're being complicit in ultimately the destruction of their lives. Either they're going to die, they're going to end up jail, they're going to end up hurting somebody, or they're going to ruin everybody's life around them. You're complicit in that action. So any kind of support you give to an addict, it's your fault. You're just as guilty as them. Once you make it too difficult for them to use, they'll stop, I promise you.
So hard truths. Now, you made a great statement, which is trauma is the gateway drug to addiction. What makes an enabler? Why do people become enablers?
Enablers, most of the time, an enabler becomes an enabler because always of good intentions. It's because mom or dad loves their son or daughter. They want to help them. They don't want to see them struggle or suffer or get sick. They always want to see the best in them. They always want to think that they have the right intentions, or they're being honest, or they have integrity. But the fact of the matter is, you're not speaking to your loved one. You're speaking to the addiction. And the enabler just doesn't get that. They don't know, they don't realize that their loved one has been taken over by a parasite, metaphorically, a parasite called addiction that is actually controlling every one of their movements, of their actions, of the things they say, the things they do. And you're no longer talking to the loved one that you care about so much. So every word that comes out of their mouth, everything that they say, they do, the only intention of it is to get and manipulate and create an environment around them that is conducive for their addiction. And they'll do anything and say anything to make it comfortable for them to use. So enablers aren't doing it on purpose. You're not trying to sabotage your life or trying to hurt the loved one. I actually really appreciate and care and respect an enabler. I understand where you're coming from. You're trying to do the right thing. You're just uneducated on the situation, and you need to be coached, and you need to be you need to have a chaperone when interacting with your addict. You have to have a mediator. You have to have a coach. You have to have somebody to intervene and help you make decisions when it comes to interacting with your loved one, because you'll always be blinded by love. You'll always be blinded by trying to do the right thing because you want to see the best in them or you care about them so much. But in reality, you're not talking to the person you think you are. And I can say that from experience because I was an addict. I would have said or did anything to get drugs. I've done some things that I'm so shameful for that not in a million years I would do if I was clean. And I'm telling you from the horse's mouth, I would have said anything, done anything. I manipulated my mom so much, she didn't even think I was doing drugs for so long. She was like convinced every other week that I got clean, and she would give me money or help me in some kind of way. And it just wasn't true. Even my dad was one of the strongest people I knew. And I knew how to work him like a fiddle. And he's like the wisest, street smart guy I've ever met in my whole entire life. You can't get anything past him. But as his son, I was able to, walk him like a dog.
No, one of our previous guests here on the Natural Healing Show, Loretta Brunig, I think I pronounced her name properly. She's a brain expert. And she makes a great comment, which is, you get more of what you treat. I'll say that again. You get more of what you treat. So recently I did a medical intuitive reading for a lady who was having trouble with her daughter. And I said to the mother, I said, now don't take this the wrong way. Your child is not a dog and she's not an animal, but you need to take dog training classes. Right? When you take, what is dog training? It's 100% people training.
Yeah.
And we're only going to get different behavior when we change, right? And so Loretta Bruning is right. You get more of what you treat. So if you keep rewarding an addict, or if you keep rewarding a child that is misbehaving, you're going to get more of that.
Yeah, it's so funny you said that. I say that all the time, the same way that you shape a grown adult's behavior is the same way you train a dog or train a baby. Every human is just a grown baby. We're the same thing. We're just a little more complex at that point, and we have a little more experience. But ultimately, it's the same exact thing. You train anything the same exact way, and you're absolutely right.
Yeah, you get more of what you treat. Now, with that, let's take a break and listen to a commercial sponsor here at UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. And we're listening today about what is an interventionist. Kevin Parker, interventionist, recovery coach. As you know, in the addiction community, so many people say, well, you have to wait for the addict to be ready to give up their drug, their alcohol, or whatever their addiction is. What is the fallacy of that thought process?
Well, they're not wrong, but they're not right. Because ultimately, the addict has to make the decision. And typically, it takes them to hit rock bottom to make that decision. Like I said earlier, people make decisions in one way, from the avoidance of pain and the obtainment of pleasure. And once it becomes more painful and harder for them to use than to get clean, they're going to continue to keep using. So what an intervention does is speeds up that process. It starts removing, it starts conceptually, in a way, if they choose not to take your olive branch of help and support and guidance on getting treatment and going into recovery, you take away all the pleasures in life. Everything that's making their environment comfortable and pleasurable to use, until they're to the skin and bones and have nothing but the basic addiction all by themselves, with them and the addiction, nothing else, no support, no love, no resources, no anything, none of the things that they value in life. And as an interventionist, I have to figure out what level of consequences and boundaries that the family is willing to adhere to and to enforce, and utilize them and leverage them in the intervention. Some might not be willing to kick a child out because they're afraid that they're going to freeze to death or starve to death outside if they kick them out, or they're going to overdose if they kick them out. And the fact of the matter is, that's not true. People are more likely to overdose in their house in a comfortable place because they have the resources necessary to get more drugs and use more, and they're more comfortable in doing so. If you do kick somebody out, which is a really hard bottom line for a lot of families to adhere to, and I understand, which is why I have other ways to go about doing it and to make it uncomfortable. But the fact of the matter is, an addict is a survivor. If you kick them out of the house and they're freezing and there's nowhere for them to go, they'll be like, all right, I'll take a warm cot and 3 hot meals right now over being freezing and doing heroin. You know, they're not going to freeze to death. They're not going to starve to death. There's a survival mechanism in everybody. Mm-hmm. You know, once their life gets to a point where, like, wow, this sucks, I don't want this anymore, that's when they choose to give up the drugs. And that's how I say, you're not wrong, but you're not right. Because they have to get to the point where they say, okay, I'm done, I'm ready to give up. But as an interventionist, I know how to leverage aspects of their life and create an environment that makes them ready faster and accelerate that process.
So I personally know of an addict who has overdosed, and that wasn't enough to cause that individual to want to get clean. So why so many people think, well, if they overdose, then they're going to be ready. And why is overdosing alone often not enough motivation to get clean?
That's a great question. And you know what it is? They don't experience the overdose. The family does. They're just out cold. They're sleeping. When they wake up, everything is good. They're alive. They got too high and they don't remember what happened. And yeah, your mother and father and brother are devastated and they're crying and they're telling you, oh my God, you were in a coma for a month or whatever. The fact of the matter is, they were just in a dream state for a little while. They didn't suffer at all. They didn't suffer any consequences. There's no consequences in overdosing. There's absolutely none for the addict. It's not conceivable to understand that. And it takes time and sobriety to understand the severity of overdosing, and to even be able to influence an addict on making the decision to stay clean. Because the only thing they ever think about is getting drugs. Even if you convince them to get to a rehab, they're still thinking about getting high. They're still thinking about it. It's just that you convinced them that this is their only opportunity, this is their only shot, of living some kind of a comfort life, maybe to shut you up for a month, and then they can come. A lot of them will be like, "Oh, I'll do my 30 days in rehab, and then I'll come out and start using again." That's the idea that they have. But the importance of getting somebody into a detox and rehab is getting the drugs out of their system, so you have a window of sobriety, so they actually have sanity and they're not in a state of psychosis, and you actually can influence them to create their life and show them that their life is falling apart while they do drugs, and there's a better way to live. And that's why I also suggest, after you do an intervention, after you do a rehab or detox or whatever, to have a very good aftercare game plan. Get hooked up with a recovery coach, get hooked up to an IOP program, get them into AA, NA, get them a sponsor, whatever it takes, whatever you want to do, however comprehensive you want to get. Because just doing an intervention and just getting in somebody to a detox and a rehab and not having an after plan and a game plan when they get out, there's a 91% relapse rate. Because the fact of the matter is, it's easy to get clean in a rehab facility. Yeah, some rehabs are better than others, and I know the best ones across the country, but you still need to have a game plan when you get out, because it's the people, places, and things that trigger you when you get out that'll make you use. And that's the environment that you got sick in. You need to learn coping mechanisms and skills and habits and tools and resources to overcome those temptations when they arise.
So you mentioned a 91% relapse rate. Is this for all people who go to rehab?
Yeah, that's the general rate, because there's some really good programs out there, and I know them, and their success rates are way better than 91%. And I'll be honest, and that's the type of places that I send my intervention clients to. And I always make sure that I match, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But there are a lot of rehab facilities and detox out there that are people mills. Their only intention is to make thousands and thousands of dollars through insurance company, because they get paid $30,000, $60,000, $90,000 for a month for filling a bed for a month, and then they're hoping to get a repeat customer. And that's what they do. You know, there's places that have all these amazing amenities. It's like a resort. So they're enticing. So like, oh, I relapse, I want to go back to that really cool place that has massages and yoga and all this cool stuff and skydiving and whatever they do, but they don't really have a good program and a solid foundation, and it's all a scam. And you know what? In some cases I've seen in Florida, they literally have drug dealers waiting outside of the gates of the rehab facility for as soon as you get out to tempt you. I mean, it's so bad. And a lot of these interventionists, they work for a facility like that. And they'll be like, oh, I'll do the intervention for free, because they get paid on the back end, and it's a constant flow of money. And it's a great business model for them, but it's a horrible situation for the person suffering and struggling with addiction. So you got to be very, very careful on who you hire as an interventionist, what their intentions are, their credentials, how they go about doing it, where they're going to send you, if they have an aftercare problem. When I do interventions, I do it from soup to nuts. I have them in a 6-month, year program. From when they get out, I get them hooked up into communities and all kinds of stuff. And that's the only way to really succeed. And you got to make sure that you're sending them to a good detox, a good rehab, for whatever their insurance or whatever their financial situation might possibly be. There are people that only have Medicaid or Medicare, and they have to go to state facilities. And unfortunately, state facilities don't necessarily provide the best services. But I do have a professional associate that has connections in all 50 states with all of the different Medicaid and Medicare facilities, and knows who the best ones in each state are. And you got to be aware of that as an interventionist, and have that kind of access to really place your client in the best possible place for the optimal rate of success.
Addiction is so hard even just to hear about, right? So what if a family does not have the money to hire an interventionist or to send their loved one to rehab? Then what?
Um, that's a really tough question to answer because, like, I mean, there's scholarships that give out. There's I've done interventions for free in my life. But the fact of the matter is, I can't do that all the time because you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of life. There are a lot. I mean, do the research in your area, wherever you are. There might be some kind of non-for-profit organization or church or religious program that offers guidance and help getting you into the treatment facility that you need. That's the best that you could possibly afford or provide for the addict in your family. And there's tons of non-profits out there. There's tons of opportunities for scholarships. When there's a will, there's a way. You just have to do your research. You have to be diligent. You have to want it. And you have to be 100% committed to the process, because I also have noticed that when people don't pay for things, they don't value them.
Mm-hmm.
They don't take your word for it. Like, I've done interventions for free, and then the enabler messed the whole entire thing up, and I wasted 2 weeks of my life trying to help them, and they didn't listen to a word I said, and I regretted actually going out and helping them because they wasted my time. So
So
if you don't have the resources to get an interventionist or get treatment, and you better appreciate it and value it, because it might be the only opportunity you ever get.
now let's say someone's listening to this program, they realize they've got an addict or addicts in their family. There could be more than one. And they realize maybe I'm an enabler, or we're all enablers. We've been rewarding this bad behavior. How can people go about finding the right interventionist?
Well, you're looking at them, but there are many different ways you can go on. You have to research, you have to look at reviews, you have to see who's in your area, who's willing to serve your area, who you align with. I mean, what kind of different values they have. If they work for a facility, if they do not, they're supposed to disclose whether or not, because as an interventionist, I usually typically give the client 2 or 3 options and give them the pluses, the pros and cons of each facility. Unless I know a slam dunk home run place that just suits their family member perfectly, and then I feel totally comfortable with suggesting. I usually, because I'm client based, I'm client centered, I make sure that it's about the client, it's not about the program. I don't care if the program makes $1. I just don't care. I really want to help people and save lives. And you have to do your research. You have to see if they're connected to a facility, see if they offer you different suggestions, or if they're just locked into one place. And a red flag is if they do it for free, they're probably connected to a facility. So if they do it for free, ask them what facility they work for, and then do a lot of research on that facility, because it may be a people mill or it may be a really good place. I mean, there are some great facilities that have awesome in-house interventionists, and that's how they do their business marketing, and that's totally legit. But you have to be very aware, and you have to do your research.
And if let's say I wanted to hire an interventionist for my family, I would assume this is not just on the Better Business Bureau. Where do I find reviews of interventionists?
The Better Business Bureau is actually a paid organization, so it's biased. You pay to get on the Better Business Bureau. All right.
Okay.
Don't trust anything you see on the Better Business Bureau. Yeah, it's an accolade to have. They do a little bit of a background, but typically you pay to get on the Better Business Bureau. I would do a full background check. See what their internet footprint is. Google their name. Google their background. Check their credentials. Look at their reviews. See if they have Yelp reviews, Google reviews, website reviews. See if they have testimonies. see who they work with, look at their social medias, see their presence, see how they interact with other people, watch their content. I mean, if somebody doesn't have content out there this day and age, that's a red flag. You should be able to build rapport with somebody you hire before you even meet them, before you even hire them. You should be able to watch a bunch of their videos and know they're legit and know that they know what they're talking about before they even do it. Or read their blogs or whatever, their podcast, whatever it might be. They should have an imprint, an internet footprint in these days if they're a professional interventionist. And if they don't have let's say, a footprint on the internet and they work solely for a facility, then I would highly recommend doing the same exact background check on that facility.
So Kevin Parker, let's say somebody's listening, they're like, okay, we have an addict or addicts in our family. We realize we've been making this easy. We've been treating the bad behavior and getting more of the bad behavior. Once you set up an intervention, what is the most crucial piece to make an intervention successful?
Great question. The most successful piece of an intervention, the most important piece of that is 100% compliance and teamwork throughout the entire intervention. Everybody that's part of the intervention has to be 100% on board, 100% willing to enforce the boundaries or the consequences if they say no. And if they're not, then not be involved at all. That's the most important part. We have to work as one unit, because the second the addict sees a chink in the armor or a hole in the fence, that's where they're darting to. They're going right through that point of weakness, and they're going to utilize it and manipulate it, because that's what they do. They're professional manipulators and they're survivalists. If they see a way to get their way or to get leverage on you, they're going to. And the only way to not allow them to get leverage or to see a weakness is to allow the interventionist to have 100% authority in that room and have 100 compliance on the strategy agreed upon before you get into the intervention.
So I'm going to take a hypothetical family. So let's say some members of the family go, decide, and they're together, they make a decision, we've had enough. We're very worried that our loved one is going to kill themselves through drugs or alcohol, but other members of the family are not on board. Do you ever do interventions with like part of the family, but not all of the family?
Yes. And we try to frame it in a way that the most power can be inflicted with the participants in the room. If mom doesn't agree, she's the enabler, and dad's in the room, dad is going to be the enforcer in this situation. Dad is going to have to take the lead route in being in charge of the recovery plan moving forward. And we're going to have to agree that mom has no jurisdiction in this area of the family unit. And we're going to have to really put in a lot of safety nets to make sure that that's possible, and figure out what the pieces of the pie that are participating in the intervention are capable of enforcing, and utilize them and leverage that.
So Kevin Parker, so we didn't talk about any of the statistics, but we know that here in the US that drug overdose is now the leading cause of death for Americans under the age of 30?
To be honest, the stats are absolutely ridiculous, and I don't even think there's a way to quantify the actual impact drugs has on our society. because it impacts not only the addict, but it impacts the family, it impacts the crime, it impacts the neighborhood, it impacts the people in any relationship. It's the ripple effect is just so astronomical. And there's even deaths that aren't even considered overdoses because, they died because they were on drugs, but they did something stupid on drugs and they died. Or it was a comorbidity of the death and it wasn't even statistically proven. But I think, from my understanding of this addiction and disease, it is the #1 pandemic in our society today, especially with the fentanyl and carfentanil that is flooding over the borders, the southern border from China, from the Middle East, from Mexico. I mean, it's the cheapest, most addictive drug in the world. So drug dealers are cutting everything with it, everything. They're pressing pills. They're putting it in marijuana. They're putting it in cocaine and heroin, anything that they could put it in just to get the people the cheapest, most addictive, most strongest high that they could possibly get. And mark my words, make no mistakes about it. Fentanyl and carfentanil are super drugs. They are the cheapest, strongest, most addictive thing known to man. And the drug dealers know this, and if they can, they're going to cut their drugs with it. And they don't care if somebody dies from using their drugs, because addicts are so manipulated and so brain warped that they think if they go to a drug dealer that some of the users have died by using their drug, that it's not going to happen to them, that just means that they have the strongest source. Because every addict never ever thinks that it's going to happen to them. They can't conceive that it's going to particularly happen to them. So if they know that somebody overdosed on that supplier, they're like, wow, their stuff is really strong. That's the good stuff. I got a good enough tolerance. I can handle it.
You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. We've been listening to the one and only Kevin Parker, recovery coach, author of Winning Against All Odds, a fabulous book. If you want to understand addiction, definitely read that book. And you can find out more about Kevin Parker and his life-saving work at his website, truewarriorsuccess.com. And remember, an intervention may be difficult, but it's less painful than losing a loved one to drug overdose. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.